The United States Constitution is kind of like a super important rulebook for our country. It's what we call a living document, because it's been around for over 200 years, but it's still just as relevant and important today as it was when it was first written. Think of the Constitution like the mother of all laws. No law is greater than the Constitution ever. Welcome to Legal Vibes, and let's see what is Constitution, its articles and amendments. Think of the Constitution like a recipe. Just like a recipe tells you how to make a delicious cake, the Constitution tells the government how to run our country. And just like a recipe has ingredients and steps you have to follow, the Constitution has parts called articles and amendments that explain what the government can and can't do. The Constitution has 7 articles and 27 amendments, but don't worry, I won't bore you with all the details. I'll just give you a quick rundown of the most important parts. The first 3 articles are all about the 3 branches of government: the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. The legislative branch, Congress, makes the laws; the executive branch, the President, government employees and his cabinet, enforces the laws; and the judicial branch, the courts, interprets the laws. The 4th article talks about how the states work together, and how they should treat each other. It also talks about how new states can be added to the United States. The 5th article explains how the Constitution can be changed or amended if necessary. It's like if you decide you want to add some chocolate chips to your cake recipe, you have to change the recipe to make it better. The remaining articles and amendments cover a wide range of topics, including voting rights, freedom of speech, and the right to bear arms, which means owning guns. But why is the Constitution so important? Well, it's what helps keep our country fair and just. It outlines the rights and freedoms that we as Americans are entitled to, and it ensures that no one person or group can have too much power. In fact, the Constitution is so important that every single person who works for the government, including the President, members of Congress, and judges, has to swear an oath to uphold it. It's like a promise they make to the American people that they will do everything in their power to protect our rights and keep our country running smoothly. So there you have it, the United States Constitution in a nutshell. It's like a recipe for running our country, and it's what helps keep us free and fair. Pretty cool. Article 6. This article explains that the Constitution is the highest law in the land. It also states that all government officials, including judges, members of Congress, and the President, have to swear an oath to support the Constitution. Article 7. This article is all about the process of ratifying, or approving, the Constitution. It explains that the Constitution wouldn't become official until at least 9 out of the 13 states had approved it. There are currently 27 amendments to the US Constitution. The first 10 amendments, collectively known as the Bill of Rights, were added in 1791. The subsequent amendments were added at various times throughout U.S. history, with the most recent one, the 27th Amendment, being ratified in 1992. Amendment I. The First Amendment is one of the most famous and important parts of the Constitution. It guarantees our right to freedom of speech, religion, the press, and assembly. This means that we can say what we want, practice any religion we want, or no religion at all, write or read whatever we want, and gather together in peaceful protests. Amendment 2. The Second Amendment is the one that talks about our right to bear arms. It guarantees that we can own guns, but it also allows the government to regulate this right to keep us safe. Amendment 3. This amendment prohibits the government from forcing us to quarter, or house, soldiers in our homes without our consent. Amendment 4. The Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. This means that the police can't just come into our homes and search them without a warrant. Amendment V. The Fifth Amendment protects us from being tried twice for the same crime, known as double jeopardy, from being forced to testify against ourselves, and from being deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Amendment 6. The Sixth Amendment guarantees our right to a speedy and fair trial. This means that we can't be held in jail for months or years without a trial, and we have the right to a lawyer to help defend us in court. Amendment 7. The Seventh Amendment guarantees our right to a trial by jury in certain civil cases. This means that if we're involved in a lawsuit over money or property, a group of our peers will decide the outcome instead of just a judge. Amendment 8. The Eighth Amendment prohibits the government from imposing cruel and unusual punishment, such as torture or excessive fines. Amendment 9. This amendment states that just because certain rights aren't listed in the Constitution, it doesn't mean that we don't have them. It's like a reminder that we have all kinds of rights that aren't necessarily spelled out in the Constitution. Amendment X. The 10th Amendment states that any powers that aren't given to the federal government by the Constitution are reserved for the states or for the people. This means that the states have a lot of power to make their own laws, as long as they don't conflict with the Constitution. The 11th Amendment to the US Constitution is a bit of a downer. It basically says that you can't sue a state in federal court unless the state gives you permission to do so. So if a state does something you don't like, you can't just sue them willy-nilly. You have to follow their own state laws and court system. The 12th Amendment, on the other hand, is much more exciting. This amendment changed the way we elect our president and vice president. Before the 12th Amendment, the president and vice president were the two people who got the most votes in the Electoral College. But this led to some weird situations, like when Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tied for first place in 1800. The 12th Amendment fixed this by making the president and vice president separate elections. The 13th Amendment is one of the most important amendments to the US Constitution. It abolished slavery and involuntary servitude in the United States. This was a huge victory for civil rights and a major step forward for our country. The 14th Amendment is also incredibly important. It guarantees equal protection under the law and due process to all citizens of the United States. This amendment has been used to strike down discriminatory laws and practices, and it has played a key role in the struggle for civil rights in the U.S. The 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. This was a major victory for civil rights, but unfortunately, it did not lead to full and equal access to the ballot for many African Americans. It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that many of the barriers to voting were finally removed. The 16th Amendment gave the federal government the power to collect income taxes. This amendment has been controversial since its inception, with some people arguing that it gives the government too much power to interfere in our lives and others arguing that it's necessary to fund important government programs. The 17th Amendment changed the way we elect our senators. Before the 17th Amendment, senators were chosen by state legislatures. But this led to some corrupt practices and backroom deals. The 17th Amendment fixed this by making senators elected by the people of each state. The 18th Amendment banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol in the United States. This was known as Prohibition, and it lasted from 1920 to 1933. It was a controversial amendment that led to a rise in organized crime and bootlegging. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. This was a major victory for women's rights and a key moment in the fight for gender equality in the U.S. The 20th Amendment changed the dates of the president's inauguration and the start of Congress's term. This amendment was added to ensure a smooth transition of power between administrations. The 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment and ended Prohibition. This was a popular amendment that was widely supported by the American public. The 22nd Amendment limited the president to 2 terms in office. This was added after Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected to 4 terms, and it was designed to prevent any one person from accumulating too much power. The 23rd Amendment gave residents of Washington, D.C. the right to vote in presidential elections. Before this amendment, residents of D.C. were not able to vote in presidential elections. The 24th Amendment banned poll taxes, which were used to prevent African Americans from voting in the South. This was a major victory for civil rights and a key moment in the fight for equal access to the ballot. The 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment was ratified in 1967 and deals with presidential succession and disability. Basically, it outlines what happens if the President of the United States is unable to perform their duties. For example, if the President is in a coma, or is otherwise unable to carry out their duties, the Vice President can step in as acting President. The 25th Amendment also provides for a process by which the Vice President can become President if the President dies or resigns, and it sets out a process for the President to temporarily transfer their powers to the Vice President if necessary. The 26th Amendment. The 26th Amendment was ratified in 1971 and lowered the voting age in the United States from 21 to 18. This was a response to the fact that young people were being drafted to fight in the Vietnam War but were not allowed to vote. The amendment was widely supported and was quickly ratified by the necessary number of states. The 27th Amendment. The 27th Amendment was actually one of the first amendments proposed back in 1789, but it took over 200 years for it to be ratified. The amendment deals with congressional salaries and says that any changes to the salaries of members of Congress cannot take effect until after the next election of the House of Representatives. In other words, if Congress votes to give themselves a raise, they can't get the money until they've been re-elected. All 3 of these amendments have had a significant impact on the United States. The 25th Amendment has been used a handful of times in the history of the country, including when President Ronald Reagan underwent surgery and transferred his powers temporarily to Vice President George H.W. Bush. The 26th Amendment has allowed millions of young people to have a say in the political process and has helped to shape elections and policies over the past several decades. And the 27th Amendment serves as an important reminder that even though the Constitution was written over 200 years ago, it still has relevance and importance today. And there you have it, the United States Constitution explained in an entertaining way. It's a super important document that guarantees our rights and freedoms, and it's what helps keep our country fair and just.